We have to figure out some way to get this message to Tom Perez and the DNC. We need to use snail mail, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, every way we can to get to Tom Perez. What the New York State Elections Board has done is unconscionable and unacceptable. Here's a statement from the Sanders campaign. Bernie 2020 senior advisor Jeff Weaver on Monday issued the following statement after the New York State Board of Elections moved to cancel the state's presidential primary. Today's decision by the State of New York Board of Elections is an outrage, a blow to American democracy, and must be overturned by the DNC. Just last week, Vice President Biden warned the American people that President Trump could use the current crisis as an excuse to postpone the November election. Well, he now has a precedent thanks to New York State. While we understood that we did not have the votes to win the Democratic nomination, our campaign was suspended, not ended, because people in every state should have the right to express their preference. What the Board of Elections is ignoring is that the primary process not only leads to a nominee, but also the selection of delegates, which helps determine the platform and rules of the Democratic Party. No one asked New York to cancel the election. The DNC didn't request it. The Biden campaign didn't request it. And our campaign communicated that we wanted to remain on the ballot. Given that the primary is months away, the proper response must be to make the election safe, such as going to all vote by mail, rather than eliminating people's right to vote completely. New York has clearly violated its approved delegate selection plan. If this is not remedied, New York should lose all the delegates to the 2020 Democratic National Convention, and there should be a broader review by the Democratic Party of New York's checkered pattern of voter disenfranchisement. We cannot let this stand. Democracy is dead, declare Sanders supporters after Bernie taken off New York ballot. Supporters of Senator Bernie Sanders were enraged on Monday after New York's Board of Elections voted to remove the Vermont lawmaker's name from the state's presidential primary ballot in the election scheduled for June, a move described by campaign advisor Jeff Weaver as a blow to American democracy that the Democratic National Committee should reverse. No one asked New York to cancel the election, Weaver said in a statement. The DNC didn't request it, the Biden campaign didn't request it, and our campaign communicated that we wanted to remain on the ballot. Weaver added that the move was part of a pattern on the part of New York to strip voting rights from its citizens and should be treated as such. Monday's decision to remove Sanders from the ballot was framed by board co-chair Douglas Kellner and Commissioner Andrew Spano, the two Democratic officials on the board in charge of making the call, as a public health concern. Bullshit. What the Sanders supporters want is essentially a beauty contest that, given the situation with the public health emergency that exists now, seems to be unnecessary and indeed frivolous, Kellner said Monday during the board's meeting. Progressives were quick to point out that the move is guaranteed to harm the prospects of insurgent Democratic candidates challenging established, more conservative incumbents. And that's what this is about. Strong suspicion that the cancellation of the Dem primary, while it has the side effect of harming this bid to get Bernie delegates to the convention, is really about protecting threatened Dem incumbents challenged from the left by giving voters less reason to turn out, tweeted journalist David Dayen. Lindsey Boylan, who is running to replace Representative Jerry Nadler in New York's 10th District, said the concerns over the disease appear to her to be incredibly selective. None of this makes sense, Boylan tweeted. I don't get it. Virus concerns for people who would vote for Biden and Bernie, but not virus concerns for everyone else who will be voting that day? None of this makes sense. Supporters of Sanders in New York, with the opportunity of voting for Sanders and adding to his delegate count and influence over the party platform taken away, were incensed. Jewish Currents editor David Cleon said the decision was part of a pattern of behavior from the party's establishment towards its left flank. Letting Bernie supporters mail in our ballots would be a cost-free way to make some of us feel the tiniest bit more at peace with the way things have worked out, Cleon tweeted. In other words, he'd feel better about the blatant DNC rigging of the primary process. Not going to happen for me. So, of course, Democrats have instead engineered a colossal wave of ill will toward the party and its nominee. Brooklyn-based activist Linda Sarsour, meanwhile, was enraged. "I am livid," said Sarsour. "Democracy is dead, but my spirits won't be." So I say we need to strike while the iron is hot. While everybody is frustrated and upset, this is what we need to do. We need to say that not only do they put Bernie back on the ballot in New York State, we also now have to take Biden off the ballot altogether. If the DNC is going to do the right thing in New York State, they should also do the right thing by U.S. voters with regard to Biden, who can't possibly beat Donald Trump. Voters absolutely need to wake up and insist that we can't have Biden on the ballot. This is a tweet by Peter Dow. Difficult thread. Biden should withdraw. Now, obviously, Biden is not going to withdraw, so what we should insert here is the DNC should force Biden out. Number 1, I respect the will of the voters. Number 2, but new information has emerged supporting Tara Reade's account of being sexually assaulted by Joe Biden. Number 3, credible rape accusations are disqualifying or we have no moral standards. Number 4, defeating Trump is not optional. Apparently, Peter has figured out that the DNC isn't serious about defeating Donald Trump. They just want to keep their gig flow going. So voters who feel that a Trump defeat is not optional need to make it clear to the DNC that Biden must not run. Number 5, to avoid potential catastrophe in November, Biden should withdraw or get kicked out. Number 6, Warren, Harris, Klobuchar, Buttigieg, Castro, etc. could replace Biden. Number 7, Bernie can restart his campaign. Number 8, we can reboot the primary and give voters a choice. Number 9, this is the ethical position and the smarter strategy to beat Trump. Number 10, we lose all moral authority if we embrace the lesser of two accused rapists. Number 11, polls show other Dem candidates can win. Principles matter. We can beat Trump and protect our values. Addendum 1, I made the same arguments about Franken and Kavanaugh. If Me Too means anything, it cannot be applied on a partisan basis. And for the record, I also think the same standard should apply to Bill Clinton's accusers. Addendum 2, my thread is not about Bernie winning. I explicitly stated that Biden can be replaced with any of the other Dem candidates and we can restart the primary and give voters a choice. This is about red moral lines. Sexual assault is unquestionably one of those lines. Addendum 3, I want to defeat Trump and the GOP as much as anyone in America. I've spent my life fighting them, but we cannot defeat Trump with a lesser of evils approach. If you really want to win, do not compromise basic moral standards. It is a sure formula for losing. Addendum 4, spare me the "you're helping Trump" BS. The only Dems helping Trump are Pelosi, Schumer, and their establishment colleagues who have given him a Space Force, Patriot Act, trade bill, ICE funding, and all the right-wing judges his heart desires. And while we're here, Peter, this is also a good reason to tell everyone to spare the BS about SCOTUS appointments. The reason the Supreme Court is so conservative is because the Democrats and the Republicans have teamed up to make it that way over at least the last 30 years. Addendum 5, apply Biden's own standard. He's quoting Biden here. For a woman to come forward in the glaring lights of focus nationally, you've got to start off with the presumption that at least the essence of what she's talking about is real, whether or not she forgets facts. That was Joe Biden in 2018. Addendum 6, if you're using the exact same arguments against Tara Reade that Republicans used against Christine Blasey Ford, do some soul searching. Feel free to compromise your principles. As for me, I think the only way to beat Trump is to stick to our principles. Addendum 7, more corroboration for a sexual assault accusation against Joe Biden. He lists Adam Serwer's, Tara Reade's former neighbor, a Biden supporter, says Reade told her she was assaulted by Biden in the 1990s. That's information that we can add to what I covered yesterday. They found the Larry King clip of Tara's mother calling into the Larry King show in 1993. And more corroborating evidence is coming. Ryan Grimm of The Intercept is not going to let this go. And Donald Trump is going to use it more and more and more over the next months. There's not going to be anything left of a Biden campaign by the time this is all over.
CNN has now gotten scooped on their own archival footage of Tara Reade's mother calling into Larry King Live to discuss the problems her daughter was having with a prominent senator. Once again, the media covers themselves in glory. Instead, the one and only Ryan Grimm got the scoop, so here's that story. Essentially, in interviews with The Intercept, Politico, and other outlets, Tara had mentioned that her mom had called into Larry King Live to ask for advice at the time. Specifically, Tara told Ryan that, quote, "I remember it being an anonymous call and her saying my daughter was sexually harassed and retaliated against and fired. Where can she go for help? I was mortified." Well, after mentioning that part of the conversation on a podcast with another friend of the show, Katie Halper, a listener was able to help track down that exact call from Tara's mom into Larry King Live, and it tracks pretty closely with the basic outlines of Tara's memory of it.
So this is what we need to do. On social media, via email, even via snail mail, we need to inundate the DNC with these demands. We need to demand that Biden drop out of the race or be removed from the race immediately. We need to demand that the DNC insiders stop pretending that they really want to defeat Donald Trump. We need them to show us that if they really mean to defeat Donald Trump in November, they need to remove Biden from the ticket. Biden must drop out of the race, and we need to follow the recommendations of Peter Dow as to how to go from here. We need to unite around these demands and make them absolutely impossible to ignore. And if it comes to this, even though some of my more cautious friends are recommending against it, I think we need to put our bodies where our mouths are. DNC operatives have houses. They have places that they live and where they work. Oligarchs have houses too, for that matter. Here's a clip with Jimmy Dore interviewing Chris Hedges.
They used to, when I said I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton, I got pilloried by the news media on the left, calling me a petulant child. I was called a petulant child on air on the Young Turks because I wouldn't vote for a warmongering corporatist like Hillary Clinton because I would then be complicit in the crime she committed. And the reason they used it was, the Supreme Court. And in the middle of Barack Obama not making sure his appointment got sat, which he could have did, he didn't. He wanted to use that issue so they could hold that over my head. When I voted, they did use it. It didn't work. I still voted third party.
Me too.
But Joe, now that doesn't really work anymore, the Supreme Court, because Joe Biden was instrumental in Clarence Thomas being on the Supreme Court and Antonin Scalia. So that now I'm supposed to vote for Joe Biden and hope he does better than Clarence Thomas? I mean, what do you say to that argument?
Well, it's a ridiculous argument, as everything comes down to a Supreme Court nomination and all of the structural systems that have created tremendous amounts of oppression, for the rest of us and funneled money towards this military machine, the programs of austerity. All of this was a bipartisan effort. I mean, in fact, there's on all of these major issues, whether it's wholesale surveillance or austerity or prisons or anything else, there's virtually no difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. Yes, the Democrats are more tolerant and are willing to put the face of a woman or an African American on as a kind of branding of empire, but it's this personalization of politics which is so infantile, and everything we debate is really anti-politics because we don't talk about anything of substance, and that comes down to issues of how your economy is structured, class, everything else. We never have those discussions, and so. I mean, voting is such a minor part of what it means to be civically engaged anyway. It's about holding power accountable. It's about pitting power against power.
And what he's about to say shows us a good way to think going forward.
I lived in France and, and I lived there under Sarkozy. And When Sarkozy tried to, he was awful, and Macron is even worse. But, when he tried to do something, next thing you know, Paris was filled with farmers on tractors blocking all the roads. My son did his graduate work in Paris. I said, when you go over there, ask your students what they would do if suddenly they started charging them $60,000 or $70,000 a year to go to college. Well, they'd shut the damn country down. And that's how we got to begin to think. And we shouldn't be having these discussions about elections. I'm very strong supporter of Extinction Rebellion. They've got it right. Of course, I'm going to get into the whole nonviolence issue, but it's got to be nonviolent. And we have to begin to create sustained mobilizations that muck the system up so it can't work. That's our only hope.
We have to shut it down. We have to shut everything down. What they've done to Bernie Sanders' campaign is enough for me. I'm willing to shut it down just because of that. And the other thing we can do is form new labor unions.
States. I mean, I do a lot of work in Europe now too. Conditions there are quite different. But if you're in the United States of America and you are watching this, one, if you don't have a union, start trying to form one. Two, if you have one, if it's good, God bless you. If it's not, start making it better. But three, if you want to form a union right now in the United States, I'm going to argue the main way that you're going to do it is by being able to actually unite the majority of workers and walk off the job and do something called striking for union recognition. And this is largely because there's two ways to form a union. One is you can petition to have an election at the National Labor Relations Board. The other is called voluntary recognition. It's always been true since 1935 in the United States that workers had two ways they could form a union. And in the union I came out of, we were actually taught to prepare workers to strike for recognition. That's a rare union these days that's still teaching people the skill of actually walking off the job en masse and saying we're not going to walk back in until you get the employer to certify that there's a union.
So we need to start forming new unions right away by voluntary recognition, which means you gather up the people who are willing and you go out on strike and you don't come back until you're recognized as a new union. It's completely legal. It's been legal since 1935. In the current climate, with people like Jeff Bezos making heat maps to see which regions are most likely to want to go on strike and form unions, we need to do it the way she's saying here. So to sum it up, my recommendations are that in addition to forming unions, in addition to doing general strikes and other kinds of walkouts and protests, we need to inundate Tom Perez and the DNC with our demands that Biden be removed from the primary contest right now. Please leave comments below if you have any suggestions or other ideas as to how to get this ball rolling on social media and any other way you can think of.